I just want to let everybody know that we are now recording, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Cris, if that sounds good to you.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everybody near and far. For anybody who may not know, I'm Megan Marshall. I'm the director of the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers series. And as mentioned, tonight is sort of a homecoming event because our guest is an esteemed SDSU alumna. You can see her ID card in the chat. And I wish, if we were on campus, I would give her a sash and we drive her around Love Library like in a little golf cart so she could wave to everybody. But, for now, this virtual space will have to do just fine. So before I introduce her, I do, of course, want to thank all of the folks who've helped to make this series possible and this event possible. And that, of course, includes all of our friends from Love Library. I have Markle Tumlin, who is co-hosting with me this evening. Hi, Markle. I also want to thank Danya Mukahal, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. And I need to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature and the MFA program in Creative Writing for their continued support of the series. And just a couple reminders, if you're joining us via Zoom, maybe we're gonna get that Facebook Live started in a minute. Please just keep your mic muted during the presentation. And then once we segue to Q&A, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. And also you might wanna use the presenter view on Zoom so that you can actually see Cris and then see those who are asking questions a little bit later. Tends to work better for the format of these types of events. So without further ado, I'm excited to welcome our featured author. Cris Mazza is the author of nearly 20 works of fiction and nonfiction, including the novel How to Leave a Country, which won the Penn Nelson Algren Award while still in manuscript form. A real-time memoir, Something Wrong with Her, a collection of short stories titled Charlatan, New and Selected, and her most recent novel, Yet to Come, from which she'll be reading from this evening. In 1995 and 96, she was co-editor of Chick Lit, Post-Feminist Fiction, and Chick Lit 2, No Chick Vics, anthologies of women's fiction, which predate the book industry's use of the term Chick Lit as a branding for a popular genre. She has taught fiction writing in San Diego, and she was the chairholder in creative writing in the MFA program at the University of Alabama, and is currently a professor in and director of the program for writers at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It's ironic that the term chick lit, coined by Mazza in the 90s to celebrate the work of fierce women authors, has been repurposed by the publishing industry to label works of fiction that are often a bit saccharine, maybe a little shallow and fleeting. Because Mazza's work is anything but. Her rich, layered narratives, punctuated by characters who, as she describes, can be victims of their own instincts as much as anything else, often making all the wrong decisions, explore what it's really like to be human, to live in an often unforgiving world filled with complexity and longing, but also with hope and beauty. Hers is the work that defies simplistic categorization. It's prose that engages both body and spirit, and as author Ria Askew states, lingers in the mind long after the book is closed. And because she's going to be reading tonight from this new novel, Yet to Come, I'm going to go ahead and share the short summation, the blurb on the back, just for those who may not be familiar with the work, to give you some context. Decades before Me Too, Cal chose his punishment for going too far with a girl he was crazy about, a life sentence with a woman he could not love, whose frequent rages, untapped spending, and ruthless children were his means to distract himself from longing and regret. The girl from his past also condemned him to periodic postcards bearing no return address. Rather than increasing his despair, the postcards helped stoke the imaginary life he maintained with her, including dialogue about his plight, images of her showing up while he plays his sax in a nightclub, and even sex, the very realm that had initiated her retreat from him. So please join me in welcoming Cris Mazza.
Thank you. Is this loud enough? Is this coming through? Okay.
Yes, coming through great.
I'm going to read an excerpt that was published as a story, and I gave it a title when I published it as a story, which is not one of the chapter titles. The title of this is Didn't Say No. And that's sort of an important title to remember as I read this. Didn't say no. The brass guy in a band he played with had a friend with a 5-piece jazz combo out in the Imperial Valley, the fucking pointless desert in El Centro. The desert guy's sax player was quitting and moving, probably moving and therefore quitting. It was a difficult place to decide to continue living. Cal started filling in at the Jazz Combos gigs, driving 2 hours each way for a $75 gig. But the trumpet player in El Centro also owned a music store, offered Cal a job there so he could stay, stop the driving. Plus the store's instrument technician was a retiring band teacher, would stay another year and teach Cal basic wind instrument repair. It could be a life. By 1983, he'd been full-time in the Imperial Valley for almost 2 years, and not alone. The woman he'd brought with him had 2 kids. One, mercifully, a boy in high school, a year remaining, then the Army. The girl turning 11, 6th grade, growing breasts. Makeup and her own phone were scheduled for next year, according to the woman, her plans for the $200 in monthly child support. The woman with the kids was someone who'd just started hanging around at his gigs in San Diego, the last 6 months before he made the move. She was a friend of the band's brother-sister singers, started hanging around him, made it easy. Or better put, he just didn't say no. The landlord would not buy new carpet, claimed he'd had it cleaned when the last renter moved out. Now 2 years plus into living there, with Trinity's and Angel's friends in and out every day and night, there was no way to prove it wasn't likely the truth. Cal checked the cost to replace the carpet himself. Too much, his business too new, his intake from the 2 jobs barely now covering rent, bills, and food. He checked commercial carpet cleaning costs and told Virginia they could start saving to do that. Virginia responded that she was looking into getting a job at the Christian store on Main Street in the storefront right beside the music store. Christian store, he said, smiling. What, do people go there when their pet lions get hungry? Virginia, squinting a little, looked back at him. What? Never mind. He took a bite of oatmeal. It was 5:30 a.m., the kids both still in bed before school. He usually got to his repair shop by 6 to work 4 hours before the music store opened. Virginia made oatmeal in a double boiler, topped it with a pat of butter and brown sugar. It was really good, but he doesn't remember if oatmeal every day was his idea or hers. What makes you think they'll hire you? What qualifications do you have for a Christian store? I've been talking to her. I go down there a lot. Why? What are you buying there? Nothing, Mr. Skin Tight. Cal swallowed, drank some juice, then said, I think that designation is for those clothes you've been buying Trinity. Big words don't make you smarter. She scraped the ring of remaining oatmeal from the pot into the trash. The kids never ate oatmeal, thus the 6 or 7 boxes of sweet cereal in the pantry. Okay, babes, I just missed you and want to see you. You're at the shop and music store so long every day. How are you seeing me from the Christian store? I usually see you in there when I walk past. She was filling the sink with soapy water to wash the one pot. But sometimes I don't see you. Where do you go? I don't know, back into the shop, to the restroom, the guitar wall, checking sheet music. He got up to fill his thermos with coffee. The coffee pot was beside the sink, and his wallet and keys sat with the junk tray on the ledge of the pass-through window where a person washing dishes could watch the TV in the living room. The TV was on now. the sound down to almost nothing. People sitting around a coffee table with matching coffee mugs. She said, "Who do you talk to on the phone so much?" "Customers. Stores have phones so customers can call and ask if you have something." "I know that. I've worked in stores." The pot clanked into the dish drainer and the drain started sucking the hot water out of the sink. "If I work in the Christian store, we could have lunch every day." When he finished fastening the 2 lids on his thermos, put his wallet into his pocket, hooked his wad of keys to his belt loop, picked up the sack lunch she'd made for him, and then looked at her, he realized he hadn't really seen her this morning. She wasn't dressed yet, but had leg warmers over sweatpants. It was probably already 80 degrees. "Are you cold?" he asked. "I have to stay in shape." His mouth opened, then shut. Best not to ask. As Cal expected, the Christian store job never happened, but Virginia joined the church the Christian store owner went to. Fridays, the older kid, Angel, started appearing in the kitchen even before Cal came in for his oatmeal. Then he went back to bed for an hour. Friday afternoon was when he would take the bus to Las Vegas to visit his dad. But it took until Cal's wallet was left flopped open after Angel went back to his bedroom, likely Cal coming down the hall a little earlier than usual, for Cal to realize he never had much cash left if he had to buy something Friday afternoon or Saturday. He mentioned this to Virginia. She said, "No, my Angel doesn't steal. He's not an animal." Cal said he was going to start keeping his wallet locked in the file cabinet, but it was going to be a pain in the ass to go lock it up every time he got home and then unlock it every morning before he left. Virginia said, "Angel needed his allowance. I told him to get it." Doesn't Merle pay his allowance when he's there, his child support? Maybe it's not enough. Maybe Merle came up short this week. "Why are you covering for him? He needs to be taught." "I'm his mother. You don't know anything about raising kids." Her wooden spoon broke in half when she slammed it on the counter. No more than 1 or 2 weeks later, one morning, just after the clock radio alarm came onto the oldies station at 5 a.m., Virginia fell out of bed instead of getting up. Then, still curled on the floor, she vomited. She couldn't stand up straight to get up from the floor to the car. Cal pulled on his t-shirt and jeans, stepped into his tennis shoes, threw the blanket over her and half carried her out the door, then had to leave her sitting on the brick planter to go back into the house to unlock his wallet and get his keys. Down the hall in the bedroom, the clock radio was playing "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain." Hours later, in the waiting room, a doctor came to sit beside Cal and let him know that Virginia had an ectopic pregnancy and they would have to remove one of her ovaries, as well as the embryo. He knew how hard this was, the doctor said, that ectopic pregnancies were life-threatening and suddenly turn what should be a happy, hopeful time of discovering there was a new baby coming into a sad time of loss that Virginia would need help and support to recover from. And Cal too, the doctor said, would feel it. Prior to going to the shop on Saturdays, Cal mowed and trimmed the yard before 7 a.m. He would do it even earlier, but running a mower and edger earlier than 6 seemed rude. No one having thumping parties with their stereo speakers outdoors seemed to worry about being rude on Friday and Saturday nights. By the time he swept the sidewalk, driveway, and front porch, it was over 80, maybe even nearing 90. He'd been finding cigarette butts on the front porch the last few weeks. Virginia opened the front door and asked through the security screen if he would like a fried egg sandwich and coffee. The kids were still in bed, the air conditioner already on. A fan blowing from the pass-through ledge across the kitchen made the egg sandwich cold by the time it was in front of him at the table. But it was still good. The egg crackly brown at the edges, cheese melted over the top, the toast light brown, not too hard. Trin and me will be coming downtown to get some shoes for her. Maybe we can meet you at the store and get lunch. She needs shoes already? There's a new style of high top tennies. I might get me a pair too and start jogging again. She wiped the congealed bacon grease from the pan with a wad of paper towels. Did her check come? Money, money, money. It's all you think about. Virginia whirled back to the sink. The fry pan clanked against the already chipped enamel. Someone has to. How about think about me, my needs for a change? Okay, what do you need? We'll go later, together. Some needs are, okay, how about when are you going to make me be an honest woman? The mouthful he chewed, as good as it tasted, was cold fried egg. It's up to me to help you be honest? What happened to your new church? It's not about them, but yes, since you asked, they do agree. Okay, he tore off 2 more bites before chewing. Through a full mouth, what is their agreement? We're living together like a man and a woman. You mean one of us is pretending? He wished he hadn't said that. He stuffed the last big piece of egg sandwich into his mouth before he'd swallowed the last 2 bites, stood with his coffee. Are you really this dense? She slapped the counter with a towel. He looked, but she'd evidently been killing a fly. Well, apparently I don't know what we're talking about. Maybe you can catch me up to speed later. Later, always later. You need to make me out to be an honest woman. Why don't you tell me what you want? We should be married. He didn't say anything, watching another fly creep toward a grease spot on the stove, then pause to rub its hands together. It takes 2 to say I do. Think about it, Cal. You have a job. I keep the home and raise the kids. It's like serendipity. It is? He retrieved his ball cap from the table beside his plate, put it back on, but his keys were across the kitchen on the pass-through ledge and his wallet locked in the file cabinet. So if you had a job, it would be a different story? You're purposefully twisting everything upside the head. With a butter knife, she tapped on the counter, like a rim shot, emphasizing every downbeat. I'm sleeping in your bed. You should take me there to be your wife. He put his hand on her shoulder as he went behind her to get his keys. We're doing okay. Let's just keep it this way. 6 months later, just when the short months of mild winter temperatures were climbing back into the spring 90s, the wedding ceremony took place in the backyard under a chicken wire canopy covered with tissue paper carnations. Trinity wore a miniskirt and midriff off the shoulder top. Angel wore stonewashed jeans and a t-shirt with a suit coat. Cal asked him if he'd found the coat in the hall closet where some of his old clothes had been moved, but Angel said, dude, no, I don't do handed downs. Angel brought the stereo speakers outside and spent a week making mixtapes for continuous music. He asked Cal what he wanted to contribute to the playlist, but besides the fact that Dexter, Pharaoh, or Coltrane should never just be mood music, Cal couldn't imagine them in the vibe for this. Virginia wore white, at least not down to the floor, full, swooshy, or trailing, but definitely lacy. Cal had asked when she showed it to him, white? What's that all about? You've been married before. I feel like it's my first time. Then that flower girl and best man you've got lined up were Immaculate Conception. At least they're supporting me. Okay, maybe they can take over with the rent and electricity. Don't be a doofus, it's my wedding. He'd let her set the date when she'd told him she was pregnant again in January. He wasn't sure how it would have happened, with how seldom he relented and how careful he was when he did. He knew enough to know it could, But in February, after the invitations had gone out and the caterer was paid half, more than wiping out the carpet cleaning savings, she said it had been a false alarm. The next one, over the summer, wasn't, but was another ectopic. And now, being married, the hospital bill put him into a deeper hole than the wedding had already hollowed out. Thank you.
So let's take a minute if everyone wants to unmute themselves and actually clap for Cris.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Cris. That was a beautiful, beautiful reading. A great section too. I think it definitely captures some of our characters. So I think, we're going to go now into Q&A. And I would like to start, if I could, with a question that I've been asking our writers thus far to kind of get us going. And that is, Cris, if you might talk a little bit about how, if in any way, living through the kind of tragedy of 2020 has maybe affected your writing or your aesthetic in any way.
I don't think so. I think what it has done is made my writing be way more of an escape for me than it ever was. The project that I'm working on was started before March of 2020. And it is nonfiction, but it's not, even though I'm present in the nonfiction, it's more about my parents, and it's what I call it's a memoir with embedded artifacts, and I am forensically investigating the artifacts that I pulled out of their house in 2018 and brought home. Letters, news clippings, roughly 5,000 photographs that I scanned all of them and put them in order. Just all of my dad's World War II orders put in order. The things he saved from the war, my mom's college annuals, yearbooks, etc. And so I've been, doing guesswork, putting their lives together based on guesswork. And it does create a huge escape for me because I'm writing things that take place in the 40s and 50s. Now, sometimes there are a lot of really awful and scary parallels in the 40s and 50s. Particularly things I didn't know about California, which I should have known. How many sundown towns there were and how the real estate industry was behind the, what are those things called that homeowners associations have?
HOA?
But the covenants, the real estate industry was behind the covenants that attempted to keep minorities out of subdivisions. Tracks is what we called them when I was growing up. They're subdivisions here. But anyway, the Supreme Court made it illegal and they just figured out ways around it. All that kind of stuff that I did research for certain incidents in my parents' life. So I was, lost in the 40s and 50s and could leave the news of the day pretty easily.
That sounds like quite the undertaking. And I mean, I guess a good distraction in some ways, but also difficult to be sifting through all of that. And I know the project is still unraveling and you said it's a work of nonfiction. Do you imagine it to be, somewhat of like another like real-time memoir or kind of maybe focused more on retelling of the lives of your parents?
It's not a real-time at all. Anything about me in it are when things that happened to my parents remind me of something, and so it might almost given as an aside. I use plural first person frequently because I have four siblings. And so some things, especially that involve our parents before we were born, I refer to them as our parents instead of my parents a lot of time. I've also had to use my siblings for research, and so so I want to use the plural. But yeah, it's not, and I'm not really telling the story of their lives. It's just little segments. When I find an interesting thing, like, why did my mom keep this? And I start researching things. For example, she had told me a story when I was writing my very first memoir and asked her questions about when she went to college in the 40s. She told me a story about she and her classmates had petitioned the dean so that the two African-American girls who went to college with them could be housed with them. It was a girls' physical education college. And I thought that was, obviously that was in the 40s. She said it was her senior year. And so I was researching that, using the annuals, and I found evidence that the African-American girls were staying in the lodging with the other girls at their physical education camps. And I thought, what, did my mom not remember? Did she make up a story about petitioning the dean? And until I discovered that the dean had changed right before her senior year. And so my speculation is the new dean was going to segregate the housing, and the students petitioned. So things like that. It's just that one little incident of trying to figure it out.
Wow, well, we look forward to reading that once you finish the project and get it out there in the world. So I know others have some questions. As I mentioned earlier, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it directly to Cris, or you can add it into the chat and I'll kind of moderate that as we go. So, oh yes, okay. So in 1987 and 97, there was a show called Married with Children. I think Peggy Bundy meets her match, since I think Virginia is a worse parent than Peggy. What inspired you to create a character like Virginia?
Well, to tell you the truth, I loathed that show and I never watched it. So I didn't even think of that. I didn't know how bad a parent she was. I am not a parent, and so maybe I am more sensitive to seeing the results of certain kinds of parenting in teenagers. But obviously, like many writers, I'm basing a character on a composite of someone, or maybe more than someone. And so, and then just imagining, by it's called method. I do when I write. I just have to try to put that life on and see what might have, where it might have gone. What causes it is, I'll leave that up to any psychologists who are reading it, but to just, be in her shoes. I'm actually not in her shoes, I'm in Cal's shoes the whole time. So it's his observations of her behavior and the results in her children.
Well, I love that idea about like method writing, right? Assuming or kind of putting on the character and being able to let that pour out onto the page.
Right, yeah.
So let's see, and thank you, Nabil, that was a great question. Let's look at this question from Millie. We talked a lot, Cris, in the class about the format of the novel, this sort of like collage, mosaic, and just to give folks a sense, what that we have like a combination of different types of text. So there's like the postcards, you can kind of see here from this lover from Cal's past, and then we have journal entries, and so it really creates this kind of rich layering aspect. And so we talked a lot about that in the class. And so Millie wants to know that regarding the format, was it deliberately intended to imitate reality better than a traditional format would? And then did you get the result you wanted from the layering of these artifacts?
As far as reality goes, I always feel that whatever form I've used in a book is organic to what that book needs to be that book's reality, or in other words, all of my books are quote unquote realistic to me. They are realistic based on, by virtue of whatever they organically needed. None of my books aren't realism, which is a style of writing. So many things can be realistic. And so I suppose that I'm just answering your question, yes, that I used this form in this book to capture a type of, a type of reality, or you could call it hyper reality, hyperized reality. I forget the second half of the question was.
Well, I guess.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, did it have the effect that you had intended it to?
Well, considering I never really decide the end of my books until I'm nearing them and I kind of get a feel for what I know it's going to do. I couldn't end it if I wasn't satisfied with something, some way of ending. I will tell you that the real difficulty in writing this book was the fact that the postcards are supposed to tell a story in and of themselves. And I had to keep them straight, and I had to make a timeline of when things were happening to her. And then I think sometimes she tells things in her postcard that were way in the past, but at any rate, when things happened to her, and create an arc with those postcards. And that was the most difficult thing to do. And then I had to fit what she was going to say on each postcard. And it was sort of like when poets use those rules for writing a poem, or flash fiction, and people think of rules, and this flash fiction will not have the word "the" in it, or something like that. I had to get those things to fit the postcards, and it was sometimes quite a chore, but I think an important one, because it taught me a lot about editing.
Well, I think it would be interesting to see, and I'm wondering, you said you created a timeline. I've heard that sometimes, especially poets, when they're trying to keep things in line, they'll actually lay out like the physical pages on the floor so you can see how the arc develops. Did you do anything like that? Did you hang them on like little clotheslines in your
I
writing?
might have done that 20 years ago, but I made a Word doc. I made a separate Word doc of only the postcards. I wrote them over there, and then I moved them over to the book when they were done. But that way I could see all of them just strung together there.
So let's see, we have another question in the chat. So Estefano, kind of coming back to character, he says, one thing that I love about Yet to Come is how you don't shy away from portraying extremely flawed characters. How did you develop each character's individual voice? And do they change as you write them? Or do you have a strong sense of the personalities as soon as you come up with the concept for the book?
No, I do believe they develop as I write them, because I have to go back and redo first and second chapters many, many times as I get further into the book. The first chapter particularly had to be redone so many times because it was a different form than the rest of the book, as you can see, that gives both voices alternating, and it jumps into the future. So because the characters are flawed, and because everybody's flawed, and because drama is gained not by what accidentally happens to you, but by what you decide and the consequences of it. Sometimes it's accidental, but often it's what you decide, what you do, what you realize, and then what you decide based on what you realize. Those things are what create drama, and then drama in turn moves or builds a character. I couldn't really change Virginia much in the book. She might have gotten more frantic or more violent, but I wasn't in her point of view. I only had what she said. I didn't have what she thought. And neither did, and Cal basically only had what she said. He didn't know what she was thinking. So she wasn't going to develop or change a lot. You would assume after the end of the book she does. But Cal did. And I can't even, because I was method acting him, I didn't have a plan for where he was going or what he was doing, only that he was in this, semi-abusive relationship. He, never got physically, seriously hurt. And the one time the police were called, they were the system of separating everybody and getting the story from both sides. The police did believe him because, the kitchen was a mess, there was a knife, etc. But I knew he was in that kind of situation, but he wasn't ever really scared. There were other things he was more scared of than that. But I just knew I just needed to follow him, and it was, what was going on with him was going to be, sorry, the word's not with me, affected by the postcards. And then the postcards, of course, created those imaginary dialogues that he had with her. And that character, she didn't know she was having imaginary dialogues with him. She had to just develop on her own based on what she was willing to tell him. And then at the end where she tells him, oh, the inner chapters, I forgot about those. The inner chapters, which you could pronounce some life or some life.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That helps to give us a good sense. And I feel like that a lot of times authors will start out with at least a general idea of where they're going, but really that even the plot, the conflicts, those develop through the course of the writing as the writing takes place. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about the process, is getting to see where those characters or where those conflicts kind of take you. Okay. How about some other questions? Is anybody brave, maybe wants to unmute themselves? Okay, well, for now we have another one in the chat from Jasmine. Who was your favorite point of view to write in, Cal or Lexi, AKA X?
What did I use her name once at the end?
Yeah, at the very end.
I wasn't going to do that until I got there. I didn't have a name for her. What was my favorite point of view? Probably Cal, because it was probably further from, I don't want to say that Lexi's point of view is very close to mine, but if you recall, when Lexi writes the letter instead of a postcard, and it's the story of putting her dog down, that's probably the most true part of this book. And I wrote it not long after it happened. And so I would say that was not very fun to write. It did make the book go in a way that I didn't know. I mean, it caused Cal to have thoughts about how he was always only just worried about his own woes or misery, and he couldn't do anything for hers. But so that hers weren't, since I had to edit them to make them so short, and then there was the some life segments where she could go for a while, but it was so hard to have an interesting plot develop in her life until I came up with the husband disappearing.
Yeah.
But that was so hard, and Cal's was just, it just sort of rolled along.
Well, we watched the little kind of book teaser, the YouTube clip that you had sent to me.
Yeah.
Kind of talked a little bit about that section. And I mean, you can feel that emotion there. It feels visceral. And we were saying, if you've ever had to put a pet down, then I mean, it's one of the worst things ever. So I think you definitely conveyed that well through the narrative. Okay, so Kristen has a question. So let's see. She was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the ending. And she says, like, not necessarily asking the question, like, what does it mean? But she enjoyed your book so much and so very delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you. She was curious as to whether you see this book, particularly its ending, as being ultimately hopeful or inherently tragic. Are Cal and X deluding themselves about one another, and will they, if they meet up, recognize in each other the very spouses they have come to despise?
Oh gosh, that never entered my mind. That they would meet up and realize they hated each other. No, what I wanted to do was end it at a point where where he had the tools to contact her, because she sent him her email address. And he, by the way, doing the technology through this book was also very difficult. When you start it in the 80s, set in the 80s, and email and cell phones had to come along. And I think he makes a comment about Twitter, like, who would want to say they tweeted something? But anyway, that was kind of fun, but difficult. Anyway, so he has all the tools he needs, and he's sitting down at the computer. I figured, he was going to email her, and I decided I didn't want to plan what might happen after that. I didn't want to create a big resolution and they lived happily ever after, or if it was a disaster, it would start a whole new book. And I've been accused, well, not like seriously accused, but when my first novel was published, no, it was not when it was published, it was when it was in manuscript. Editors were complaining that it had a depressing ending. So on that one, I made the last word in the book smiled. The character smiled, but it was certainly an ironic way that I responded to that. There was nothing really to smile about, but I do leave my books usually in a kind of an open-ended place, but in a place where the characters got what they need now to make another step, to make a new step. Either they know what they need to know, or they've got, the guts that they needed, or whatever. And I think Cal has both of those things. And I can also say this much, that I did rehook up with someone that I'd known in high school and college. And he's sitting here now over off camera listening to this.
Hi, friend.
He doesn't want here. But the story of that life is very fictionalized. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to get into the next phase of it, because of it's, it might be different for Cal and Lexi. You're right.
Well, it was interesting. It's something that we also discussed extensively in the class, was, well, is it really a hopeful ending? Is he going to kind of break out of this routine that he's so confined himself in, to actually make that leap and meet up with this long lost, love, essentially? And then, because he had been having this sort of invented relationship, would that manifest in the way in which, they would hope for it to be when they actually met up? So,
that is always dangerous when you fantasize, when you carry fantasies or idealized vision of somebody for that many years. The real danger is that, but the way I think that's one of the reasons I had her telling him in postcards Why do you even like me? And that there was parts of her that he had access to in those postcards. I don't remember. I think she did not tell him what she had done to her ex-husband. He when she ruined his, she kind of raped him. her ex-husband. Was that not? I don't think I took that out.
No, there were intimations. I'm trying to remember which section that I'm thinking.
It would be in a Some Life section.
Well, I feel like that. I mean, that's one of the things that they both have in common is this sort of self-loathing and, the fact that they've done these things that they're not proud of, and
yeah, right.
That shapes their views.
Right. Yeah, it's in one of the Some Life things. Yeah. She wasn't kind and sympathetic to him. Probably Cal was far more kind and sympathetic to Virginia than Lexi was to Blaine.
Yes, yeah, we definitely get that through the Some Life and also in the postcard snippets too. Okay, so we're gonna take a break from the chat for a minute because Raz has a hand raised and would like to ask a question.
Hi, Cris. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Hi.
Your novel was equally a pleasure to read.
Thank you.
At the beginning of your novel, or towards the beginning of the novel, on pages 30 to 31, you write a scene where the cops arrive at Cal's home to investigate possible domestic abuse after Virginia has basically thrown him out overnight. And we read that text again on pages 322 to 323 towards the end of the novel. And so I'm curious about what your intention was behind the text repetition, if at all, more specifically, whether that was a stylistic choice.
Okay, I don't know if I'm using a book with different page numbers. Where's the first place is?
It's on page 30. Let's see.
Oh, yeah, okay, I see it on page 30. Where's the second place it is?
And the second place is on page 322.
Oh, yes, yes. I know I did that on purpose. And I might add, I kept having to go back and forth and make sure that I didn't change anything. Yes, because that was going to be one of the things that helped him decide what he was going to do. And like I said, the first chapter, I was throwing in flash forwards. I felt that the first chapter was not helping the book, but by throwing in the flash forwards to see where he ended up after these things, it was almost like the trailer for the book in a way. In the first chapter, you never see them together again, but you do see them together there. And she is kind of mean to him there, isn't she? Yeah, she's probably the character. Lexi's probably the character I can't explain the most, and yet she would probably be the one who was the closest to me. And maybe that's as it should be. I don't think we should be explaining ourselves because we don't have good insight. But yes, I did that on purpose because it was one of the culminating moments of his story. It gets him right up to, yeah. It gets him right up to the last 2 pages where he sits down at that computer.
Thank you, Cris. I was just curious if there was what your motivation was in doing that.
All right, thanks, Raz. Let's go to a question from Simon in the chat. And he says, first, he wants to say that the book made him a huge fan of your writing. He's going to be reading all of your other work.
Wow.
I know, he better get started now because you have almost 20 titles. So he's asking, what message were you trying to express when you had Leo taken away from Cal and have Cal kind of almost not do anything about the situation because it seems like this was the only reason beside the postcards given for Cal to like become better. Like that would have been maybe an opportunity for growth for him, but yet he kind of doesn't do anything to change the situation.
Right. Well, legally, he had never done anything to to make the guardianship official. So he couldn't very well grab her kid, and it would be kidnapping. He wasn't even related to the kid. So that was the legality. Why didn't he just do it anyway? He was a bit paralyzed when it came to anything having to do with Virginia and her children. Every once in a while, he would break out of that paralysis, like when he had to fix the birthday disaster. But yeah, Leo was something that was a bright moment in his life, and what it had to do for the sake of the book is to, you know, put him back down into darkness for a while. Otherwise there, you know, if he just had raised the child and the child, you know, went off to college and everything turned out right, it might not have, you know, it would have sort of been a book that was dramatically fizzling. He would have started throwing the postcards away, maybe, I don't know. So it was something that dramatically had to happen, but it also shows how paralyzed he was when it came to anything having to do with that family. And yet his one of his reasons, I think he says this, for taking them on was, you know, to distract himself, and maybe he could help them. But he doesn't help them very much. He tries, but you know, keeping the kids safe for as long as he did was about the most help he was able to do.
I would say, I mean, those scenes between him and Leo were just so tender. I mean, they were some of the most beautiful in the book, I think. And especially like when he saves the birthday.
Yeah.
That was a great chapter.
Yeah, that was pretty wrenching for me while I was to think about that 5-year-old. That's always sort of gotten to me.
Mm-hmm. All right, so maybe we'll do time for a couple more questions. Let me see, there was one back in the chat. So I'm gonna start with Tasso's, and I think we'll end with Anka's. So Tasso wants to know, he was wondering about Trinity's journal entries that you decided to include. Did you struggle at all in writing or implementing that style? It does provide valuable insight into her perspective, and it was also incredibly uncomfortable to read, but in a good way. So if you could talk maybe about, yeah, the decision to kind of show us her perspective as well.
Well, there was going to be no way to show it otherwise. The struggle was, should I show it all at all? Does it need to be shown at all? Why does she need to be in this book? But it deepened her a little bit into somebody who wasn't just, you know, a horrible thing, you know, that wasn't just all selfishness and drugs and everything else. That she had, there was something to her, and maybe there was a reason why she was becoming the way she was becoming. You know, her mother wasn't much help. The mother's it was the mother's list that she wrote for the psychologist of mistakes she'd made. You know, could show that, and then when Trinity writes the pros and cons of her mother, she lets me smoke. She lets me wear whatever I want. You can just see it there. You know, so and there was also the need for that journal dramatically. If I want to apologize, first of all, everybody. And I usually say this at the beginning of one of these events. You've read the book a lot more recently than I have. And I've been working on that other project. This book was accepted by a publisher almost a year and a half ago, and it was done then. And I haven't, the last proofreading was a while ago, but it seems to be coming to me that Trinity's journal was needed dramatically because she left it open on the table on purpose to a certain entry. And so therefore he took it and he read the rest of it. And that entry was sort of a danger sign that she could accuse him of rape to get rid of him. Was that what it was?
Right.
I don't know if she did it slyly by saying she had a dream or something, but I think that's what I did. But that was, you know, sort of she left it there on purpose. And so it was part of the story at that point. Part of it entered his, if he had never known she had a journal, then putting the journal in would have been, I think, not good writing, not good novel constructing. It would have been an excuse to include some pretty wild behavior, but you know, no other reason for it.
Well, it definitely does seem to make her character even more round as well. So, and just kind of hearing from her voice, like you said, gives her another layer, I think, too. All right, so I think that this would be a good question to conclude our session with. So Anka wants to know, you know, seeing as you have almost 20 works and spanning all different types of writing, she's curious to know if it gets easier with each book or harder, or whether each is entirely different with respect to the writing process. And she's curious, especially if you could compare the fiction with the nonfiction.
Well, some things get a lot easier. What gets easier for me is that I trust myself. When I'm stuck, I just don't write. If it's a week, if it's a month, if it's 6 months, I just don't until I'm unstuck. Because it's not, I don't believe in that, oh, you've got to force yourself to write, you know, X thousand words a day. And even if you have to throw them away, I don't espouse that. If I trust myself that it will come. I trust myself when I haven't written a story in a long time, but if a novel is not working or I don't know what it's going to do, just stop and it'll come to me. I think about them a lot when I'm not actually sitting there writing them. So that's what helps. I do have to sometimes write down notes or I'll forget them. But what has gotten harder? Let me think. What has gotten harder is what people want out of books now is different, I think. That my characters are all flawed and create their own dramas instead of being victims of something. I mean, you could say Cal is a victim of Virginia, but he didn't say no. And so sometimes that's not what is considered the most desirable thing now, and or more heightened plots having to do with more heightened types of violence or more political and or social issues. Not that spousal abuse isn't a social issue, but I didn't raise it to a level of stalking and killing. So I think that's what's become harder, is to make a book engaging, make a book interesting, make a book effective without, you know, the reason I paused, I was just realizing one of the reasons I find, and as everybody probably sees the same thing, the news so difficult, is that there's so much of it that they've got to use fear on both sides, have to use fear in order to get you to pay attention to it. That's sort of like the heightening of plots in novels as I see it. It's got to go higher. It's got to go another, you know, got to go further, be more bad, be more horrible than the last things. So that's what's been more difficult. nonfiction is it is a different writing process. I try very hard with nonfiction. My number one rule is that I can't be writing it because this thing happened to me and you should know about it. That cannot be my reason for writing something in nonfiction. So I usually make it bigger and try to tap into history along the way. For example, I had an experience when I was a student at San Diego State. I was between my undergrad and grad, I got a teaching credential, California teaching credential, which I never used. I had an experience with my student teacher that these days would be called a Me Too experience or sexual harassment, but it happened before sexual harassment had been defined. And so when I was writing about that, I paused and I digressed and I gave a brief summary of how sexual harassment was defined, where it came from, why it was part of Title IX, why we have it in our, I didn't say this, but why we have it in our Title IX training. That Title IX wasn't just for funding. By tapping into history, I can open up something that is my personal experience, but I can't expect other people to care about it just because it happened to me. And so it is in some, should I say, it's easier to write in that way, but it's also harder to create an arc. And of my 3 nonfiction books, including the one I'm finishing now, only one of them would not be called a collection of essays or linked essays. And it's the real-time memoir because it had the real-time story going through it of what was happening while I was writing it. The other 2 are linked essays because coming up with an arc or a story for a nonfiction book is difficult for me.
Well, thank you. We so appreciate your time this evening and your helpful advice and just, your very generous answers to all of our questions about this book and about all of your other work as well. So those of you any other students or attendees, if you have not checked out Yet to Come, it is now officially released. So you definitely, hopefully will be able to grab a copy with ease and get into this story because it is so well worth it. So let's thank Cris again for her time this evening. So appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again. And, best of luck with finishing the new project. We can't wait until it comes out and we get a chance to read it as well.
Thank you.
All right. So thanks everybody. Get home safely. Don't trip as you get up from your seats. Your computers. And we will see you all in 2 weeks for Stephen Paul Martin's reading. All right.